All right, fantastic. So with that, a very warm welcome to the February session of the Spencer 2023 webinar series. What is the Spencer Educational Foundation? We are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to supporting students who wish to pursue careers within this industry, risk management, insurance, actuarial science. And we do so through various programs, including scholarships, internship grants, general grants for universities and other nonprofit organizations, curriculum development at universities, and other experiential learning opportunities. We do have some wonderful guest speakers with us here today from Sompo. Our main speaker is Navid Zarinejad, the head of sustainability. So Navid, if you would, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure, and if you don't mind, I will share my screen.
Yes, please.
This way. That's always a question.
Perfect, we can see it.
Can you see, you just see the main slide, right? Title slide.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so my name is Navid Zarinejad. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. So I appreciate the invite. I want to give you a little bit. Well, first of all, can I see a show of hands for those who are on camera? How many of you have had some exposure to ESG, or at least have heard of it or know what it is? Okay, I know one of you is writing a thesis on it, so maybe you should actually be speaking. Regardless, okay, no, that's good to know. And our goal is to get to 100% by the time this meeting is over. I think that goal is within reach. So let me just give you a real few notes about me. I studied stats when I was in college. I also went to school in upstate New York, where it's quite cold. I was studying to be the statistician for the New England Patriots before they were actually good. But that did not happen, as you probably can tell. In case you're interested, this is a rendering of what that would have looked like. But anyway, I became a P&C actuary and a property casualty actuary, and eventually transitioned into the risk management space. And this is what I look like doing risk management. And more recently, I started studying climate change risk as part of my role on the risk management side, and eventually became the head of sustainability at Sompo International, which has been mentioned. We're a pretty large property casualty insurance company based in Japan and Bermuda, with operations all over, New York, London, Zurich, and so on. So I enjoy the ESG world because it gives me kind of a holistic view of the organization. So you look at every line of business, every functional team, you talk to every stakeholder we have, and it's a really fascinating space, and it's constantly evolving and changing, and I find that quite exciting. So let me move on here. So this is what I want to discuss today. I want to talk about what ESG is, actually define it. Talk about where we've seen this before, because you've probably seen other iterations of this. I want to talk a little bit about how we got here, why we do the things we're doing, who are the stakeholders involved, and then talk a little bit about the insurance industry. So what can insurance companies do? What is this net zero thing that you guys have probably heard quite a bit about? Talk about how difficult it is to think through ESG concepts. And then I want to leave you with some takeaways, because I'll probably talk a lot, but I only want you to remember 3 or 4 things to keep it easy. So let's go ahead and start with a recent example of ESG. And does anyone know who this is? Can anyone tell me who this person is? I'm assuming you're all on mute, but this is...
yeah, Evelyn raised her hand. Feel free to unmute yourself. Go ahead.
That's Taylor Swift.
Very good. Okay, there's no prizes, but that's great. You are right. This is Taylor Swift, and we cannot talk about ESG without talking about Taylor, and I will tell you why. So maybe a few of you tried to buy tickets to see her show on a certain website recently. Let's protect their anonymity and call them Ticket Maestro. So Maestro was very unprepared for the Swifties, right? So they had this ticket sale in November. This was pretty big news, and it was a total meltdown, big disaster. so many things went wrong, and it made a lot of headlines. This prompted congressional hearings last week. And really, this is not the first time there's been an issue with Ticketmaestro. So they've faced lawsuits and investigations for decades about things like anti-competitive practices, deceptive selling, overpricing, unsafe concert conditions. So companies in competitive industries can't really get away with that stuff, right? So if Pepsi quadruples their prices, you'll probably drink a Coke, right? And you won't miss a lot. But Ticketmaestro kind of operates as a monopoly, in the event space. So they focus on maximizing profits rather than giving their customers a positive user experience, right? And that brings me to my point. One pillar of ESG, which we're going to define in a minute, is how companies treat society and people, right? So companies get ratings for this, right? Ticketmaestro happens to get the lowest possible rating for social behavior, which is not good. There's not a lot of companies that get a 1, out of a 10-point scale for social, because this is how you get customers, in competitive industries. Unfortunately for me, I was familiar with Ticketmaestro and these experiences, because I had this same nightmare happen to me 30 years ago when I tried to buy Pearl Jam tickets, and they ended up canceling their tour because of their issues with Ticketmaestro. So they have not really evolved. And even though my daughter really wanted to go to this Taylor Swift show, I said, there's no way I'm sitting in the queue all day, because I knew that Ticketmaestro would not provide a good user experience. Phrased another way, I knew they were trouble when they walked in. So let's move on. Okay, so let's talk about what is ESG. So I think the easiest way to think about this is it's just a framework that helps companies think through their risks and opportunities. So we have the E, right? So, how does a company impact the environment? For instance, how much, CO2 does it emit into the atmosphere? This is obviously a huge deal with climate change. There's the S for social. How does a company impact people? How does it impact society? These are things like supporting your employees with diversity initiatives, being nice to the Swifties when you're selling concert tickets. And then you have the G, how is a company run? How does it make key decisions? For example, what are the roles of the board of directors? What are all the corporate policies you have? Conflicts of interest, anti-money laundering, employee behavior, that type of thing. So that's all that ESG represents, right? It's as simple as that, E, S, and G. But what does it mean when I say it's a framework, for managing your risks and identifying opportunities? I'm talking about a set of steps that companies can take to try to understand the impact it has in each of these areas, right? So, for example, ESG principles advise companies to elect qualified boards to provide oversight. It sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, right? So my board, my company's board, is a bunch of retired insurance executives who know a lot about property casualty insurance. But I'll give you an example. Lehman Brothers, who most of you are probably familiar with, was a very big investment bank, fourth largest in the country, and they were somewhat responsible for the 2008 financial crisis. Their board of directors included a Broadway producer. There was a rear admiral from the Navy. There was an actress who was in Caddyshack 2. And this doesn't strike me as the right team to oversee complex financial transactions, right? And it was not, because the company's not around anymore, right? So an ESG framework, had it been more mainstream at the time, might have prompted a company like Lehman Brothers to reevaluate their board membership, right? Another example, of an ESG frame, how you apply an ESG framework might be, setting and reporting quantifiable ESG goals. So take a company like Warby Parker, which sells eyeglasses online, and they have some stores. Obviously they have their eyeglass business, but their big purpose is to try to get glasses to people who can't afford them or don't have access to them. So there's 1 billion people around the world who just can't get eyeglasses and they desperately need them. So they say they'll give a pair away every time someone buys a pair of their glasses. Not only is it a great marketing technique, but it's a wonderful social goal, and it's very measurable. You actually can't get more measurable than something that's one-to-one. And in their annual report, they can talk about how many glasses they gave away in addition to how many they sold. So and it's 8 million pairs so far, which is impressive. So it's one of those things like, how does that make you feel, right? So if you walk by a Lens Crafters and a Warby Parker, which store are you going to walk in knowing that one of them is doing this, pretty wonderful, in my opinion, social endeavor. So anyway, so there's lots of different ESG principles that can go in your framework, and you absolutely do not need to know what they are today. What I do want you to know is that companies used to focus solely on achieving profits, right? And some of them still do. Years ago, we relied on governments usually to kind of manage social progress and provide environmental protections. But today, companies have just grown so massive, right? They've grown in size and in influence. Apple's market cap is $2.5 trillion now, and I have 17 old iPhones in my kitchen drawer, right? So that's a lot of influence. So given how relevant and integrated companies have become in our world, we need them to do their part in solving these big problems, especially the climate one. So that's really the concept of ESG in a nutshell. It's pretty simple in theory, but we'll see it can be kind of complicated in practice. ESG sometimes is used interchangeably with terms like sustainability or corporate social responsibility, CSR. But ESG, I think, gives us a little bit more. So sustainability really, in my opinion, refers to the practices which, keep a company afloat for a long time, right? It aligns it a little bit closer to the E for environmental, things like a company's greenhouse gas emissions, the energy it's consuming, the water it's using. So sustainability really addresses those problems of climate change, but without like the measurement component and subsequently without accountability, right? So it's interesting, but not entirely that helpful. CSR is also a little bit qualitative, right? And focuses more on the S for social. Here are the charities that we're working with. Here are some causes that we're advocating. Our staff volunteered on all these committees. That stuff is great. My company supports lots of causes like that, like women becoming insurance executives or the African Caribbean Insurance Network. These are important things to us, and they can help launch an ESG program. But we need a little bit more than that. So ESG kind of brings this all together. It has a focus on E, like sustainability, and then it borrows from the S principles addressed by the CSR world, and obviously it brings in the governance piece as well. And it's much more quantitative. So it's actually making companies accountable, and the things that you say publicly, become more credible, right? You get held accountable for those things. So sustainability and CSR also have a little bit more of a charitable flavor. And I want to make this clear about ESG. This is kind of also an important point. This isn't just about saving the world, right? So that's how some of the stakeholders see it and what they're striving for. But in terms of corporations, this is about gaining competitive advantage more so than it is saving the world. So hedge funds and asset managers are really into this ESG stuff. If you've seen Billions on TV, you know that this crowd does not cry when trees are getting cut down or species are going extinct, right? They're thinking about these ESG principles because they're not so much worried about global temperatures, but they're worried about financial results, right? And they know that ESG is good for business. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
This is great. That was actually one of the questions that I had is what's the difference between ESG and CSR? So thank you. Thank you for explaining that.
We focused on CSR until just a few years ago.
Right.
That effort's been around since really, the late 80s, early 90s, companies have been doing that. And it's important, but it didn't really have a lot of, measurement, right? So being able to, we keep statistics in our company of like percentage of women managers in the company, or percentage of employees who took parental leave, right? These are important to track, and we want those numbers to keep going up over time. Before, you didn't really measure it; you just said, "Okay, these are things that we should try to strive for."
All right.
Awesome. Before you go on, and maybe you have a slide on this, but could you touch on some of the challenges, right? Because we are a for-profit company, right? And I'm sure our Warby Parker is too. We are not a charitable organization, but it's a balance, right? Where we have to do the right thing. And I think we've also seen that a happy workforce is a better workforce. And I think Sompo International has learned that these things are important to our employees. And by being active in this space, we actually think we can do both, be profitable and have a competitive edge in the marketplace. Can you just touch on that if you don't have a slide on it later?
Yeah, we have a couple slides on that actually, but I'll say really briefly, you're absolutely right. So if you do any kind of ESG surveys, and we don't even have to do them because there's been hundreds of them done in the industry by recruiting firms, by HR firms, that have found, this is maybe the most important issue to, employees in Generation X, Generation Z. This is what they care about, right? And they will leave, they will reject offers of more salary, higher compensation, to go work for companies that have, that deliver on social issues and stand for something, and put their money where their mouth is, right? So we've seen this time and time again. I've had people, come to me internally. I've only been in this role for 6 months, but they've told me, this is so important to me, and I was doubting my purpose here, and this actually aligns with my vision of what I want to do with my career. Is there any way I can be involved? Just on the side, like, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. And to see that passion in people, like, just is so much validation for me to be like, oh, this is, there's so many more reasons beyond, profitability and the things I just talked about. Like, this is good for business. This, one of the reasons it's good for business is because it engages your employees and other stakeholders. So, but we'll get to, in a few slides, I have a little thing on all the different stakeholders. So
Great.
Again.
Thank you.
Yep. Good question. So how did we get here? Why is this becoming so mainstream? One of the reasons is the world is clearly changing, right? So climate being the most obvious example of that. Hurricanes, floods, wildfires, winter storms, these have obviously been around for a very long time, but clearly the characteristics of these catastrophic events are shifting a little bit, right? So some are increasing in frequency, some are changing in severity. With ocean levels higher, you're getting more water, washing ashore, inland flooding, coastal flooding, more rain with, more moisture in the atmosphere. So clearly, the climate is changing. That part is not controversial in my opinion, despite what you might hear in the news. So there's obviously the climate component. But beyond that, there's just companies behaving badly. So this is also something that's been around since, the cavemen. But examples this century tend to have a wider reach because the world has become so interconnected, right? So events like, Enron's collapse, the Volkswagen emissions scandal, the BP oil spill, what happened with Cambridge Analytica and their data scandal. These are big events and change the way we think about, ESG. So another reason this has become so popular is investor demands, right? So ESG really grew out of the investment world, and investors really do believe that companies with strong ESG profiles and strong ESG frameworks are going to make better investments, right? They're going to provide a higher return in the long run. Regulation is another important contributor for kind of similar reason. Governments know that companies with strong ESG mindsets have a lower chance of being the next Enron or Volkswagen. And in some cases, governments have passed laws actually criminalizing, things like discrimination and encouraging diversity So that's also helped kind of push along some of the social aspects of this. And finally, technology plays a role. It's enabled more of a ability to quantitatively measure the progress in ESG matters. So we can now sort and sift through ESG data to analyze a company and their ESG credentials.
Vic, can I just jump in there for a second too, because we have risk management and actuarial folks in the room. So Naveed touched on it, right? Sompo International and our peers, I'm not just going to make this a Sompo commercial, but we are a large commercial property and casualty insurer. We also have specialty operations. So that means we cover goods and goods on a boat as it's in transit. We cover properties. We cover commercial real estate for flood insurance. We have management liability, cyber. I would say that ESG has made its way into the commercial sector from insurance, not just from hey, Sompo's trying to do positive things, but it's impacted how we underwrite and price risk. Obviously, we have a lot of Florida property exposure. That world has changed, but even from a financial perspective, how we underwrite and price risk for companies with a higher ESG score, or that we perceive to behave better or have a better board of directors, may be a better risk, right? Would Enron have happened if their folks, had a better ESG framework, right? With the BP oil spill, which was a massive financial loss, anytime there's financial loss in any industry, if there could be a potential for financial loss, there is an insurance product behind it. So as we start looking at companies, regardless of what product we're trying to insure, ESG is making its way into the underwriting, into the actuarial modeling, into the pricing throughout the supply chain, the insurance supply chain.
Yep, thank you, Ben. So why do we do this, right? So what benefits does it have? First of all, reputation, right? So based on what we talked about earlier, what do you think about Ticketmaster's reputation now, right? How about Apple's? Apple's recycling millions of iPhones. Their headquarters is a giant solar panel. They're protecting mangrove forests, in Colombia and India. They're giving us an amazing user experience. So they get one of the best ESG ratings in the country, and they have net zero goals for, I think, 2030. So, pretty soon. Risk mitigation, another, thinking in an ESG way can help us identify our risks. So maybe you manufacture some product and you rely on a supplier in a country that's susceptible to typhoons, right? Establishing an ESG framework can facilitate, kind of identifying all those, supply chain risks and forming contingency plans in case, there is a typhoon and you're unable to get the part you need. Just like risks, practicing ESG can help you identify opportunities as well. So in the insurance world, companies with strong ESG frameworks have started providing micro insurance in places like Africa, India, South America. These are tiny insurance policies, small premiums, but there's billions of uninsured people all over the world. So this is a massive growth opportunity in a previously untapped market. And then there's cultural benefits. So like we mentioned a minute ago, this goes such a long way with employees, right? So would you rather work for the company who dumped the 3 million barrels of oil in the Gulf of Mexico, or the one who's trying to clean it up, right? Or prevent it altogether? So it really does, these principles and these concepts and having a social purpose really do help retain good employees, help recruit new employees, and actually studies have shown it improves productivity, right? So employees that are proud to work at a company just tend to be more productive, and we see that every day here.
That's awesome. I love that. And thank you for sharing all of these positive impacts, right? Internal and external positive impacts on ESG. We do have a question from Evelyn. She's got her hand raised. Go ahead, Evelyn. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Hello, Navid. As you were saying, the increase in productivity from having great employees, what we're seeing currently in the cyber market is more mental health services that are entering for insurance companies. They're writing those. I think it is a challenge. I feel like writing that because it's so new in the sense. Do you have any like anything to say about that? Because I think that's such a new thing that's entering the market right now. We see colleges like University of Kentucky. I think colleges like University of North Carolina has also been opening to that in the sense of like ESG. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Could you say, sorry, Emma, could you say the first part of the question again?
Yes, I was asking about the increase in like mental health services for like insurance company plans that are moving into that, because companies and universities have been working with that. Do you have any like comments on that?
Sure. You're talking about as a corporation, us offering mental health services as opposed to insuring them in the health insurance sector.
Yeah.
The first one. Okay. Yeah, I think that's awesome. One thing I do is I look at a lot of our peer companies and try to study the things they do, because some of them have good ideas. Like, we don't have to invent everything we do, right? So I noticed one thing one of our peers does is they recently gave every employee 2 mental health days. And it's like such a simple thing, but that can be so powerful, right? Like, how do you make an employee feel like their contribution is valued and they're important to the organization, right? And we'll get to an example in a case study in a few minutes where the complete opposite happens, and it's just not a good situation. So I think that's awesome, and it's something that there's probably not enough of today that corporations should consider, right? So a lot of companies now have like a room or conference room somewhere in their office. We have one where employees can go and like meditate and sit, and it's also used for new mothers, but it's an area just to kind of get away from everything. It's low lights and you can relax, and I think we need more of those rooms, right, across corporate America, and give people a break, right? Because working 8, 10, some cases 12 hours if you're at like an audit firm, in a row is taxing, right? So I think that stuff is really, really important and makes employees feel like you're valuing their contribution.
And David, I would just chime in. So Evelyn, good question. And Sompo is a P&C insurer. In the United States, we don't underwrite and offer health insurance, right? We have it as a company, but like, we're not the insurer on that front. But that's an example of where I think the company is doing something that's socially responsible, but it's also to help maintain the fact that they are for-profit entity, because the way health insurance works is if the insurance company is providing that as a benefit, you would hope that those pool of people, whether they're at the university or if it's Sompo, right, our health insurance is at, or whoever it is, we would be a better insured, right, because we are a healthier group of people, right? So it's ESG, but it's also hopefully reducing the risk of the pool of people that you're insuring. So it's certainly, there's benefit to both parties in that regard.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question, thank you.
Very good question. So I just want to talk a little bit about the stakeholders, and I'm going to run through this because in the interest of time, I want to get to our case studies. But I like this quote. I think this is kind of important. ESG can be thought of as a shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And again, there was a time when we really just thought about our shareholders, right? Our investors, they voted for the company's boards of directors, the boards appointed the executives made all the decisions based on maximizing profit. So investors were kind of the right people to try to impress and cater to. Today, there's so many more voices we want to listen to. So, as an insurer, we have our customers, we need to know what they want. We need to think about how our business impacts the communities we're operating in. We want to think about our business partners, what they're asking for. This could be the insurance brokers we work with, the audit firms that review our financials, the landlords, the buildings we're renting, even, the vendors we use, janitorial services, catering, whatever it might be. We need to think about, all those stakeholders. There's the activist community. This is especially relevant with climate change. There's regulators and governments. That's kind of the price of admission, keeping them happy. And a really important stakeholder, which we kind of just discussed, that was often overlooked in the last century, is a company's employees, right? So how many super successful companies can you name and have a miserable workforce. I personally can't think of that many. So not all these stakeholders have the same interests, which is one of the things that makes this complicated. In fact, sometimes their interests are directly competing, and that's a tricky thing to navigate. So I won't get into this in too much detail, but this is kind of an example of how you could set up an ESG program. The social and governance pillars are very important, but there's tremendous attention to environmental. So a lot of companies are kind of focused on the E. So, obviously as an underwriter, we write insurance policies, meaning we evaluate the risks involved in a policy and determine whether we want to offer coverage. We can try to integrate ESG principles into that underwriting process. Maybe the underwriter asks the company a question like, do you know what your emissions are, right? And maybe you're more interested in like the yes, no part of that answer than the actual number, because it gives you an indication of how much they care about, the climate problem and their response. Investments, kind of a similar thing. Let me get the investments in there. We're buying stakes in companies rather than insuring them. But you might ask similar questions. Do you want to invest in a company that's a big polluter? Do you want to invest in certain industries like tobacco and guns and conflict minerals? Not so much from a political standpoint, but rather as an investor, these industries could be volatile because of the political component. So those are things to think about. Claim settlement is obviously another major function that an insurer. Maybe you want to build a sustainable claims process. Like if a hurricane knocks down someone's house, what if we rebuilt that house with stronger materials? It might cost a little bit more, but you could reduce the chance of a further claim, a future claim, which would benefit us. And then you might think about your operations, whether you can install solar panels or LED lights or turn your company's fleet of cars into electric cars, which would have both energy savings and cost savings. So these are the types of things you would think about, and obviously you could support these activities with disclosures, annual reports, and the compliance aspect, keeping regulators and others aware of the things you're doing. I want to briefly talk about net zero because this is a big topic. My company, Sompo, as you can see from the headline there, as well as many other companies, not just in insurance, but across all industries, have committed to becoming net zero by the year 2050. In some cases, some companies are going earlier, some are going later, unfortunately. And you may be familiar with this, but net zero means that the emissions you're releasing into the world are equal to those that you're removing. And how do you remove emissions? Well, a company like Delta Airlines that's flying 4,000 flights a day and releasing a ton of greenhouse gases into the environment, they're planting 1 billion trees to take as much CO2 as they can out of the environment. In practice, that doesn't really work because when trees are eventually cut down or they burn down, the CO2 goes right back into the air. But nevertheless, these are the types of things that companies are taking credit for to get to the net zero standpoint, get to a net zero position. So, okay, well, that doesn't sound so bad. What are my company's emissions? I turn the lights on when I get to the office in the morning. We have a few company cars that certainly have some emissions. I use the coffee machine 8 times a day. That obviously uses electricity. So I can just plant some trees, right? Unfortunately, that's not how it works, right? We have to think about all the emissions associated with our company, with our value and supply chains. So for an insurance company, we have to think about the emissions of every single company we insure and every single company we invest in, right? So in our case, that's millions of companies. And we're going to take a tiny slice of each company's emissions and adopt them as our own. So this is what makes kind of these net zero promises so difficult. It's not just about our direct emissions and energy usage. It's also the emissions associated with all the companies we're doing business with. So the companies we provide insurance to and the companies that we're investing in. And this is quite tricky. So I want to move to some case studies because I tend to talk too much. So these are 4 real world examples of companies that a company like mine might insure or we might invest in. So I want to think about the ESG considerations if we were to underwrite an insurance policy for these. So starting with this one, we have Company A. It's an American manufacturer of electric vehicles whose CEO has personally acquired a company in an unrelated sector. I don't know if this sounds familiar, but let's assume that this is something that exists today. What do we think about this? Does anyone have any thoughts of environmental, social, or governance considerations? I can't see the hand raising, so if anybody can. Anybody, any thoughts?
I'm looking at Evelyn and Mimi. What are your thoughts?
I can do the first one, and you guys help me out with the rest. So,
Okay.
here's my take. So, transportation is the largest contributor to emissions in the U.S. It's about 27% of our emissions. So, electric vehicles are absolutely necessary part of the climate solution. But from a governance perspective, this is not good, right? So, what qualities make for a good CEO? You should be, things like decisive, engaging. Intelligence obviously helps. You have to be adaptable to changing conditions, but you also have to be not consumed with an unrelated business, right? So this is a governance disaster. And if you're an investor in this hypothetical company, you're probably not too happy because the stock has dropped 70% since the CEO took this stake in another company. So this is a textbook example of how ESG considerations can have serious financial consequences for companies. It's a nice car though. Okay, so you guys are on the hook for this one. This is, let's see, did I get it up there? Okay, here is a Danish restaurant. That means it's located in Copenhagen, not that they only serve Danishes. But this restaurant has been rated the best restaurant in the world, right? The cuisine is, amazing, out of this world. And even if you've never stepped foot in Denmark, you've probably eaten their food because thousands of restaurants have tried to replicate their magic. So what do you think about this?
Well, it's good for that about the environment part where it is sustainable. The food is coming from sustainable farms, but how they're treating their employees, the social side needs more work, because if I want to go work in company B, I don't want to be physically abused and verbally bullied every day, for sure.
Great answer. Yes, I agree with you. And if you see Gordon Ramsay on TV yelling and berating chefs in the kitchen, and you think, oh, this is so dramatic, it's not, because this is the actual, this is the other thing that this restaurant is famous for. So physical abuse of employees, bullying, not even paying them. So, the cuisine at this restaurant was so restricted that 30 chefs worked there for free just to get the experience. So obviously sustainable farming, we're all for that. That's great. It makes both delicious food and it's great for biodiversity and local ecosystems, but no other industry would get away with treating people this way, right? So the Michelin stars kind of shield them from criticism for a long time. Only recently did they receive backlash for this type of behavior. So they actually announced last month that they're going to close in 2024 because they'd rather deny the world great food than pay people a living wage. So
Wow.
it was, this one's kind of eye-opening.
Hey, David, and I know you've got more slides, but I think it'd be an interesting question is there anything, there are the companies out there that are scoring each other for ESG. How about people trying to monitor, and I'm not going to phrase this correctly, but in terms of whitewashing, right? Or that's an example, right? Where let's use Apple. I'm making it up, so if somebody from Apple watches this, don't call and sue me. They're doing all these great things, but they're using labor camps in China, making it up, right? So is that whitewashing? And is there somebody trying to monitor that, or is that taken into the consideration by the folks that are doing the ESG scores?
Yeah, so we call it greenwashing. So there's a lot of companies and
green, white, similar. Come on.
I don't know. I don't want to name a lot of names, but there's a company that delivers to my things to my house in 2 days. And they're named after a rainforest. We make lots of pro climate. like the boxes that now I get diapers in the actual diaper box instead of a second box around it. And they're using sustainable paper, to make those boxes, and they're buying electric trucks and they're doing all these things. But the fact of the matter is, like, you still need to fly things all around the world to get people their products, right? And there's a lot of other, considerations for things, and the way that they treat their workers in warehouses is always been questioned. So there's social aspect, So there's a lot of that, and this is what makes this world so difficult. You have to make these decisions, which is kind of what these case studies are, which are obviously very simple, but they're just designed to show that there's no right answer, right? There's no, there's so much gray area. It's not black and white. I'll run through this one quickly. Solar panels obviously seems like a great thing, but the solar panels are made from these thin slices of silicon wafers that get doped with chemicals and electrified to become solar cells. And half of the world's solar wafers are made on the other side of the world by an ethnic minority under very harsh working conditions, right? So things that we would consider forced labor or slave labor here in the US. And the US actually passed a law banning imports from this region, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of these solar panels just sitting in our US ports. So this stuff is hard. It's, we have to weigh environmental benefits with social circumstances. And I don't know what the right answer is, right? That's why there's a whole industry that's designed to give companies scores for E, for S, for G, and it's up to, every corporation to decide what types of companies they want to do business with. And I had one other example. I'll skip this one because I want to give Emily a chance to speak. But real quick, in summary, hopefully, these studies kind of give you a taste of things we have to consider when trying to think through ESG principles. There's a handful of things I want you to remember. First of all, ESG is a framework that helps companies think about their risks and identify their opportunities as they relate to environmental, social, and governance considerations. It's a shift from thinking about profit only to thinking about all the parties that can be affected. So our communities, our customers, our employees, our business partners, and so on. Companies don't just do this to feel good about themselves. Maybe some do, but there's serious financial consequences, good and bad, right? So companies that can do this well can thrive, and companies that don't do this so well could suffer the same fate as a Lehman Brothers. And we talked a little bit about how, due to climate change, the E is getting a ton of attention, and many companies are making these net zero pledges to try to eliminate emissions. So if every company in the world did that, we would probably avert the worst of the climate crisis. So there's clearly a lot of momentum from customers and investors and activists and others trying to convince the companies that they're associated with to try to make these pledges in order to become more of the climate solution than part of the problem. So that's all I had. If there's any more questions, jump in. Otherwise, Emily, I want to give you some time to chat.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Navid. That was very, very informative. I truly appreciate it. So as you mentioned, we do have Emily here with us today. Emily is our Spencer Scholar Spotlight for this month, and she is an underwriting trainee at Sompo. So Emily, if you will, just tell us a little bit about yourself, and for anyone here that has not met you before, perhaps tell us, where are you located? Which school did you go to? And how long have you been working for Sompo?
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to be here, Navid. That was a great presentation, something I would have loved to hear about in school. So I've been at Sompo since last July, so it's been about 7-8 months now. I am in the Chicago office. I'm on the professional lines Sompo Pro team, so I do cyber insurance, miscellaneous professional liability, architects and engineers liability, things like that. And in school, I went to Illinois State University. I graduated last May, and I was a double major in risk management and insurance and finance. So, any questions you guys have about, interviewing, the transition into going from being a student to working, you know, it hasn't been quite a year yet, but I would love to answer any questions you guys have about that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Any questions so far from the group for either Naveed or Emily?
I actually have more of a comment for Naveed. I really appreciate that, and I wish that I hope to learn that in graduate school, because I feel like you're giving a great lecture. That we're in graduate school and we're learning about ESG. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, my pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we wrap up the session? I want to make sure everyone has a chance to say hi or connect.
I'll just say one last thing too. Obviously, the Spencer Education Foundation is a fabulous organization, and I hope that you guys stay connected to it. And I would just say too that, you know, follow Sompo and our peer group. You know, commercial insurance, you know, he is not the only person doing this. I think our industry is on the forefront of this and other things. And I would just say too that, you know, Sompo and our peer group, I'm not going to make it a Sompo commercial, but we do have, like Emily, we have about 55 trainees every year in the United States. We have upwards of 50 or 60 interns every year. And that's consistent with our peer group. You know, our competitors do it similarly, you know, truly trying to invest in the next generation of talent. So you guys are all in excellent majors, those of you that raised your hand, and I encourage you to stay connected to Spencer Education and then Sompo and our peer group for sure. And good luck.
Yes, I'd like to make it a somewhat Sompo commercial because I love it here. I've loved the training program. I applied and then I interviewed with like 8 different companies before I graduated. And when I got the offer from Sompo, I had interned here previously and I entered in a totally different department and I love it. Look for a company that's going to match your values and is the culture that you want to work in. You know, like I'm sitting here, I get to work from home 2 days a week. So I get that hybrid that I wanted. I get my cat sitting here who's right in front of me. So I would just say that's the biggest thing, is just interview and pick a company that matches those goals. And, you know, having somebody who's the head of sustainability, who's talking about important concepts like ESG is so important. So.
I completely agree. Thank you for that, Emily. Thank you for sharing your experiences of working there as a recent graduate working at Sompo. We appreciate that. And Naveed, of course, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and you being here with us. And Ben as well, thank you for hanging out with us for an hour. This has been absolutely awesome. So as I mentioned, the session has been recorded. We'll post it on our website within the next few days for anyone that may have missed this session. And we do this every month. So we will catch you next month on March 9th at 1 o'clock Eastern. Have a great day, everyone.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Bye.